Hello, everyone. We are officially live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who is watching us. My name is Fernando, and we are here once again with the GMAT Club, always bringing you the best content regarding GMAT preparation, how you should best prepare yourself to go over the test, to apply to masters, MBA schools, MIM schools, and to any masters you would like. So if you like our content, first thing I will ask, as always, don't forget to like our video, subscribe to our channel because it helps a lot. And today we have the pleasure to be here with Hank. I will let him introduce himself, but before anything, it's worth to say that he got a kind of okay score at the GMAT Focus. I mean, it was okay, 775, the 100% score. So I bet he's gonna have a lot to share with us, a lot of tips and tricks for how to best prepare. And I will just stop talking. And hello, Hank, how are you? Could
Hi.
you just talk a bit about yourself to us?
Yeah, thank you. My name's Hank. I am a working professional. I work in the gaming industry, and last fall, I started studying for the GMAT in mid-October. Took the test at the end of November. Had about 6 weeks between those two periods, or 6 weeks to study, and yeah, I got a 775, and then I applied to schools in round two. And waiting to hear back.
Love it. And you mentioned that you work in the gaming industry,
Hmm.
right? So I love, by the way, the poster behind you, like Buddy with the chainsaw. Love it.
Yep.
And I think it's an industry. I even met a guy once that wanted to pivot to it post MBA because
Hmm.
I believe it's growing as a post MBA go. And what are your general impressions of it, Hank? Like right now, where you are working, what's your feeling about the industry as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going through quite a change right now. With there's a lot of expansion. I think now there's some contraction, and I work in kind of it's interesting. Like I don't think it's an industry that really has defined pre MBA, post MBA roles. Which I think makes it like a very interesting one to want to go get an MBA coming from, since it's one that a growing number of people are coming into post MBA. So it's been really interesting to interact with some of those people who have come from an MBA into the industry at my company. And it's made I think the difference of like my job and their job is what's attracting me to an MBA. So I think it
Mhm.
is a industry that's really has been growing, is gonna continue to grow for MBA grads.
And oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted
Oh,
you.
no,
Were
no,
you
no,
going
that
to?
no, that was it.
And so, for how long have you been working on that?
I've been in animation and gaming for 6 years.
Mhm. Oh, nice. And being for 6 years post
Mhm.
undergrad in this industry, why an MBA now? Like, this is not an interview at all, but just to give some information to people watching us. So, what took you to make the decision of no, this is the moment? I think I learned what I had to learn here to take the next
Mhm.
step in my career.
I think it was a mix of, kind of where I was personally at, and then professionally where the industry was at. The personal side being, um, like you said, I had, I feel like I've learned a lot. 6 years, I've had a couple different roles, worked with a couple different teams, so kind of picked up a variety of experience. And it's been on the more technical side, so I think business degree would kind of round that out. And, then, um, on the kind of where the industry is at, I think, with the rise in machine learning, AI, a lot of growth and change and evolution is coming, and so it's the perfect time to go study,
Mhm.
hopefully know more about that, and then come out and
Uh,
execute on that.
Nice, amazing. And do you intend? I know that these intentions are very preliminary because when we get to the MBA, so much changes, and we get to know
Mhm.
so many new doors that are being opened to us that were not open beforehand. So, is your goal, at least for now, to continue in this industry, or you're still wondering about that?
I think it's uh, the primary goal would be to continue in the industry, but
Yeah.
like you said, I think one of the great opportunities of an MBA is that I could go in and be exposed to so many things I can't even consider right now because I am not
Uh-huh.
aware of it. So I'm really interested to, get to school and find out what other possibilities are.
Nice. That sounds amazing. And it's what happens to many people here
Yeah.
at Darden. I could see it being a second year at Darden. Many
Hmm.
people go in like one in consulting, then they end up going to tech or vice versa. So a lot changes. And I forgot asking you, Hank, where are you calling from right now?
Oh, I'm in Los Angeles.
Oh, oh my God. So we are both in the US, but we are like
Yep.
3 hours
Oh,
apart.
yeah, 3 hours
I'm
apart,
Eastern
opposite
time.
coast.
Oh, so 7:06 over there.
Hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, I've got some coffee.
I have got it too, but here it's 10:06. I'm
Yeah.
not an early person, early morning person at all.
Hmm.
And one thing, so you had the 6 years of career
Hmm.
experience, of work experience, then you decided you wanted to go for an MBA to really take this next step and to
Hmm.
learn. So having that in mind, Hank, how did you make your decision among the many options that we have? So, how did you decide whether you were going to prepare for the classic GMAT or GMAT Focus or
Hmm.
GRE executive assessment? What was your thought process on that?
It was really just kind of. I mean, I came in pretty blind. I don't work
Mhm,
day to day with many people who have gotten an MBA. I haven't been exposed to many people who have gone to get an MBA, so I had to do a lot of research online, really looking into the process. And I quickly settled on the GMAT. I think because it was known as the more business focused test. I didn't want to take the GRE because I wasn't interested in other types of grad school, and uh, I didn't I know I like considered, oh, I guess I could take this, but it really just came down to seeing that at most schools, the plurality of people took the GMAT as opposed to the GRE. So I thought, okay, I'll go with the one that most people are taking. The classic versus focus was a real decision, which I guess isn't relevant anymore since the classic's been
mhm,
sunset. But for me, it was the shorter tests, the lack of sentence correction, which when I first started doing a couple of practice problems, I didn't like as much. Um,
mhm,
and the more condensed sections. And I really like that it was three sections.
mhm. Nice. Yeah, it ends up being much, I wouldn't say much shorter, but it makes
Hmm.
a difference, right?
Yeah,
When you had the chance. I remember that when I took it back in, oh my god, time passes by so fast. But back in mid 2021, we didn't yet have the GMAT Focus, so had to go with the like larger version of the
yeah.
test and everything, and just endure it. And so once you were set for the
Hmm.
GMAT Focus, Hank, um, going in for the test center or the online, did you consider these two options or you were
Yes,
already set for one of them? How did you think about it?
I considered both, and I thought about online options, but I kind of anecdotally on GMAT Club on Reddit, I like had read stories of how hard of a process it was to get online setups
Mhm,
approved. So some horror stories, and the process of getting a whiteboard and everything, and clearing that. And I, living in LA, I'm pretty lucky to live near several test centers, and so I didn't mind going. Especially, I think what it really came down to for me is one, I didn't want to have any trouble with the online setup. Uh,
mhm,
I would just want all that handled, and two, going to a physical testing location, I think helped me focus more. That's probably not true for everyone. For some people, you want to take the test where you've been studying, and that really helps. But for me, like a very sterile environment that is quiet and focused, like this is the test day, this is a big thing. That really helped me kind of focus in and know that it was the big moment.
Nice having this kind of real break, right? Here is where I
Yes. Yeah.
study to
Hmm.
take the visual test and to really take it for test day, being in a test center where you are
Yeah.
supposed to do only that, right? So
Yes.
I completely agree. And one thing that many people are asking here,
Hmm.
by the way, Max sent you congrats for the score,
Oh,
as I think all of us would say.
thank you.
And here, so Harsh asked us a question that we were going to that right moving forward.
Hmm.
And he asked where to start preparing for the GMAT Focus Edition. So where did you start your preparation, Hank, once you had decided that this is what you were going to do?
Yeah. First thing I did, and the first thing I think everyone should do, regardless of strategy, is to get the GMAC free official materials and take the first practice exam blind. Um, when you start studying it, you can you want a sense of how well you know the material, but more than that, I think you want a sense of how well you know the test. This is that was kind of my focus always studying was it was great to know material, but I wanted to know this test and study for how this test works because it is a very unique test. So taking that first practice exam blind, I was able to kind of realize like where I was from the scoring perspective, what kinds of questions I was getting wrong, and also already knew how my timing and pacing were and what needed to be worked on. Uh, so I really recommend taking that blind. And then beyond that, I thought about many of the tutoring companies. I started in October. The test didn't even start until November. So I was a little wary that any non-GMAT official materials would be playing a bit of a guessing game because the test hadn't started yet. I'm sure there are many test companies that have already sharpened that up. But to me, that led me to just stick with the official materials. So I took that first practice exam, and then I read through all of the free materials, and that didn't do any practice questions. Just read through the materials, which helped me get a better understanding. That first score I got was 645, so that was my baseline. So I had a pretty good baseline to start with. And then I took a second exam a week later and got a 655. So actually studying the materials hadn't done me much good. I knew from there I needed to pivot into uh, more practice focused studying.
Nice. So the first step you would advise people to take is really to go in there and take one official test just to set this baseline
Yep.
and see where you stand, right?
Yep.
And so you mentioned that you studied for 1 week, right, before taking the second mock test. And when you saw that your new score hadn't increased as much, did you change your strategy or how did you feel about it all?
I felt okay. I was a little disappointed because I had put a lot of time into reading all the materials, but I think it helped me realize like, okay, I don't need to do this. I tried the really just absorbing everything, and I already have a pretty good understanding of that. So that is not where I need to focus. And I did change my strategy then. From there on out, I did very little reading over concepts, and really just did practice questions, and then reading through answer explanations for ones I got correct, for ones I missed, all of them. So from there on out, it was really just practice, practice, practice.
Perfect. And we are even answering now the Shantanu's question. Please feel free to correct me, Shantanu, if I'm spelling your name wrong. I'm sorry. So he was asking exactly that. Not only the study material that you use, like you said, the official test, but also your strategy. So all the material that you use, Hank, because we studied for 6 weeks, right, to take the test. So all the material you used during these 6 weeks were all official material, or did you use anything else as well?
All official material. Once I had finished reading through the free material, I bought the official guide, and then in addition to that, the Quant practice question bank. And I just went through first the question bank for every question, the official guide, and then all the Quant questions.
Nice. And going into that, so getting all of these like pool of questions that you had, all of this pool of possibilities that you had to practice, how did you structure, Hank, exactly these 6 weeks that you had in terms of should you study verbal or quant for how long per day? When should you take another mock test? How did you structure your strategy of study?
This is it's hard to say I have like a regret or anything because I'm obviously very happy with my score, but I think I could have structured it a bit better. The way I did it was I was working full time this entire time, so I didn't have 6 to 8 hours a day to study. I would carve out 2 to 3 hours a night, and then on the weekends try to get in 4 hours a day. I would usually miss 2 weeknights in there, so I'd make sure to not miss a weekend night if I just had something going on. So I tried to study about 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. And I my quant was my weakest, and so I really focused on that. And it took me. I was just kind of a completionist. Of once I had done all the first round of questions for all the categories, I just went heavy on quant, and there were 228 questions to take in that guide I bought, and it was just like every night 2 hours I'd make it through some. mostly untimed, and it took me a couple weeks to get through all that. So that was a couple weeks, and then uh, the the way I did it was I really had a back half heavy practice exam session of like I did all those questions and then took practice exam three. And I wish I had my recommendation would be to take one a week. Like I had 6 weeks. I could have taken one practice test a week, and I think that would have caused me a little less stress and give me a lot better sense of where I was at.
So it would be basically your advice. Let's say you spend 1 week going over the
Hmm.
questions, over the explanations, and then one day on the weekend, let's say you take one mock test to see where
Yeah,
you stand. Then again,
yeah,
you go back to the questions,
right.
then another mock test, and keep going this way.
Yeah, and
And
one thing
you,
actually, if I could add
sure,
to that, is I
sure.
think there I said I have said how focused I was on quant, but I think it shouldn't be underestimated how taking a practice exam is also studying.
Mhm,
Taking six practice exams, that is 135 verbal questions.
mhm,
And I went after a practice exam, they give you all those questions. They don't give you the answer explanations. You have to
mhm,
manually type that into the Google search bar and then add GMAT Club and then go to a forum where it's already been discussed. But I did that.
mhm.
So I went through every verbal and DI question on those practice exams. So that was a good amount of studying there too.
Like, so not only, if I'm hearing you correctly, not only you went over the explanation of the official questions, but also
Hmm.
on the mock tests, you
Hmm.
went out there to just be sure, what did I get wrong? How should
Yeah.
I get it right? That's
Yeah.
nice.
And even if there
And
was one where I got it right, but I was like, I don't think I really know how I got that one right.
uh,
Then, yeah.
like maybe it was out of luck. Not that I
Yeah.
think that from your score. I mean, not out of luck at all, but sometimes just some questions you're not really
Mhm.
100% sure,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And something very interesting that you mentioned, Hank, was about practicing untimed. So, how did you structure that? So, were all the questions that you would take during the week untimed, and only the mock tests would be timed, or no? How did you structure that?
They would be the practice questions would be untimed officially, but I would try to do them with a sense of urgency of there was a clock in the corner, and if it hit 2.5 minutes and I hadn't figured it out, I would, you know, use my best guess and move on. But then on review, I would do like a group of like 15 questions, and I would try to get that done in 30, 35 minutes. And then after
Mhm,
that, I would come back through, and if I had missed any, I would not look at the answers yet, and I would just take as long as I needed to try to get it right. And then
mhm,
after that, I would look at the answers. So it kind of an initial run through of, and yeah, I really, in particular, about you know, doing something timed is very serious. Like it should be test like conditions. So I wasn't,
mhm,
doing test like conditions for hours every day, but I was trying to limit myself to 2.5 minutes per question on the initial run
mhm.
through, and then come back through and take as much time as I
Nice.
needed.
So, despite not being like exactly timed,
Yeah.
you had
Mhm.
inside your head this sense of urgency. I'm
Right.
not just going to be here thinking about the question, but I will go over it as effectively
Yeah.
as I can. Nice. And you mentioned that one area that you had like that was harder for you was exactly quant.
Mhm.
That's so like I suffered with that as well, quant at the GMAT. So did you just go over more quant questions than verbal? So did you had any specific proportion between one and the other or not exactly?
Yeah, I don't know a specific proportion, but I went over
Mhm,
many more quant questions, and
mhm,
it really was just like truly working through every question they had. And I would say, in addition to that, like the concept I struggled with the most, I think, was prime factorization, and it was really the identifying when a problem
mhm,
was a prime factorization problem. I'd be like working on for 2.5 minutes as something else, and I'd be like, this is prime factorization. And so that was
mhm,
one where, just through doing so many questions, I started to realize that was a pattern of a problem I had. And then I, did some uh, looking through GMAT Club to figure out like what are strategies to figure out how to identify this problem.
mhm,
But so that was kind of a tangent off of the question. The original question was quant more than verbal. Yes, I studied in these like 2 hour chunks outside the practice exams, pretty much just quant questions for the final three
mhm,
weeks. And then verbal is something I started pretty strong in. So, like I said, taking the practice exams is a lot of practice questions in itself, and there was a lot of review to do with that. But luckily, I was strong enough in verbal to start that just by doing 6 practice exams, I was able to get better and better, start to see the patterns where I was missing problems and fix it that way.
Nice. And we do have a lot of questions
Mm-hmm.
here to ask you. Please, everyone watching us, feel free to keep sending your questions to Hank so we can ask him and get all of his tips and tricks for the GMAT, for his application journey. And also remember to like our video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot to keep doing this work. And so one of the things, I think you have answered that already,
Mm-hmm.
but Technoper asked if you use GMAT Advanced Questions book.
Yes, for Quant I did. I used the standard book for all the sections and then just the Quant Advanced ones. I also bought the DI one, but I never got to it. And I wish I had, but I just ran out of time.
Nice. And the next question that we have from Karanvir, since you mentioned that you had more trouble with the quant aspect, for quant, Hank, did you use any reading material to brush up skills and concepts in general?
Yes, well, like I said, I first kind of read through the entire official guide. I didn't find that the most helpful. What I found actually more helpful was, and I wish I had a link to the exact form, but it's a GMAT Club quant forum that has like all the chapter breakdowns of different sections of quant, and that's what I read through to really crack prime factorization. And I also referred to that a couple times, looking through other chapters of different types of quant questions.
Mm-hmm. So another question here, we went over that as well, how to prepare for verbal, but would you have, besides what we talked about, Hank, any specific advice for people that struggle with verbal specifically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what I attribute my increase in verbal to is I switched my mindset approaching each question from read all the options and figure out which one's right to kind of a process of elimination of which ones don't fit for critical reasoning questions. That was my mindset that helped. I would always, and this helps because I'm a native English speaker and a strong writer, but I would always read through any block of text before reading the question, and I would take a beat after reading through the block and just see if anything came to mind as sometimes there'd be sometimes where it's like, okay, I've read this argument. It kind of is relying on an assumption, right? And then the question would be, what is the assumption? And so that would make it so kind of taking a minute to just read it as like, putting myself in the position of, if this is a research paper and I'm reading it, what would I be asking for? And that didn't work all the time. Sometimes the question would be something completely different. But yeah, I would then just breaking out each option and using a process of elimination of like, this doesn't fit. This doesn't fit. Okay, so this is the last one that does fit. I think is much better than just trying to pick out the one that fits right away.
Oh, and that's very interesting because many people do take the approach of sometimes, let's say, taking a look at the question before going over the text. So your approach would be the opposite, right? So you would go over the test and think to yourself, what questions would I be asking myself, like to validate what's being said here? And then with this package of knowledge, text plus these questions, you had answer to yourself, you would go to the questions.
Yeah. And I think the more you study too, the easier that gets because you start to see patterns in how GMAT Club asks how GMAT asks their questions in verbal. And so you start to see like, oh, okay, this is reading like an assumption question. And that just comes through a lot of practice in verbal.
Nice. So you start developing this kind of mindset, right?
Yeah.
And so Harsh sent us another question here. So should every subject needs to be touched daily, or you can choose a subject day-wise? So I remember you mentioned, right, Hank, during the last 3 weeks, you went only for quant, if I'm not mistaken. But for the other days, how would you pick the specific subject?
I would do one subject a day. That just really helped me focus in. I think I was able to, go deeper on a certain subject that way. And so I wouldn't say that every subject needs to be done daily. But for other non-quant days, it would be I would do it in blocks. If I would go over multiple in a day, I would never like have a quant question and then a DI question. I would never mix them up in any practice session because that's not how it's going to be on the exam. One thing, once I settled in that the order I was going to take the exam was quant, DI, and then a break, and then verbal, I did start to do. I would study some quant and then study some DI because I knew I wasn't going to have a break in between those in the test, and I needed to be able to have that context switch in my mind ready to go to be able to jump from quant into DI.
Mhm. And it's great that you mentioned DI because Vishal asked exactly about that.
Mm-hmm.
How specifically, Hank, did you prepare for DI? And if you have any thoughts on this section as well?
That's interesting because I see DI as like a bit of a kind of combination of quant and verbal, and I think focusing
Mhm.
on quant so much for me personally ended up helping me in DI because it just increased some of my math skills and looking at numbers. My thoughts on the DI section, I think it's a very interesting section. I think it's the most fun because it's almost like more practical cases than just hard academic material, even though it's the one section I missed some questions on. So I prepared for it pretty similarly to how I did verbal, which is not a lot of dedicated questions outside of practice exams, but by taking 6 practice exams, I took over 120 DI questions and reviewed each one of them pretty extensively. So in a similar way, I started to kind of recognize different types of problems. And the one part of DI I focused a lot on was the 2-part analysis. And I think, all the strategies that are out there are the ones I recommend for that, of breaking it down, of having your different groups of, going through number one first, finding out if that's, if that applies, and if it doesn't, then going through number two, et cetera. So the 2-part analysis is where I spent most of my study time on DI. And those are the ones that were the trickiest for me in studying. But it really paid off because there was one at the end of the section I know where I looked at it for a minute. I was like, I have no idea, but like, I think it's this just based on, kind of all the patterns I've seen. And like, I've done the rough work and I can't prove it because I don't have time, but I think this is like where it's leading. And I got that one right. So that
Right.
was a welcome surprise.
And it ends up many times being about that, right? Because you might not have time to go over the entire question for
Hmm.
all of them, but this intuition that you build helps you
Yeah.
to do, as you said, right? To
Yeah.
go forward and be able to confidently select one of
Yeah.
the answers. And I feel that I'm getting old when you are all talking about DI and stuff, and my GMAT didn't even have this DI thing.
Right.
Anyway, 2021, like it looks like so long ago. Anyway, hey. And one other question that we got here, getting a lot of questions, Hank. You are very
Hmm.
popular. So another question here is for verbal. If you could break down your timing on reading comprehension and critical reasoning, because Karanvir is struggling with time management. So how were you working on that for verbal?
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know what my time breakdown was exactly between those two. Um, I I would say that verbal, the time wasn't usually an issue for me. But it did become an issue in a couple practice exams, and I think this is just one of the many reasons I really like that I studied so many practice exams. Is I was able to figure out when to give up on a question when I was falling behind,
Mm,
and I approach timing differently for different sections of the verbal. If it was a short passage with an answer, I'd be like, all right, this is a 2.5 minute question. If it's a long passage and I know there are going to be 2, 3, or 4 questions pertaining to the passage, I would give myself 4 minutes on the first question. Um, Maybe 4.5. I think on one, if I on GMAT Club, I posted my score sheet. I think on one I had over 5 minutes on a verbal question, and that was the first question of a large chunk of text section. And I would give myself a lot of time to really understand each paragraph and then go to the question. And then the next two, 3 questions were under a minute each because I'd already done the bulk of the reading. So I think it's important to know what's coming and that it's going to average out. So for me, that was the biggest one, is the large chunks, just spend a lot of time up front. and then do the questions quickly. And for anything that's just a short paragraph in one question, just kind of time that out for 2.5 minutes. That was one. There was a question that I initially missed in verbal, and I was able to go back and get it right. That was one where I spent 2.5 minutes. I had it down to 2 answers, and I knew through experience of taking a bunch of practice exams that when I got it down to 2 answers, if I changed my mind and focused on something else, when I came back, the final answer was usually pretty obvious. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to guess. It actually happened 3 times in the section. I pretty much had it down to 2 and guessed 3 times. And then I marked all those questions, came back at the end. It took me like 10 seconds on each one to realize that on 2 of them I'd guessed right, on one of them I'd guessed wrong, and I switched the one I'd guessed wrong on. So yeah, I would say to keep the timing right, know which questions are good to spend a lot of time on, and know when to kind of call it. And I think the best thing about the GMAT Focus is you can come back and edit answers.
And that's very, very interesting to hear. So you would mark these questions you were not sure, and then come with a fresher look to see again whether it made sense, the one alternative you had selected, or whether you would just pick another one.
Yeah. And when you go back and there are only 2 options that you're reading because you've already eliminated the other 3, the question just looks so much easier because it's not like a 50-50 multiple choice.
And would you have a set number of questions that you would go, let's say you are in question 1 and you're not sure. So would you go always until like question 5 and come back? So 4 more questions, or no, it would depend.
I think the exam makes you finish the entire section and then go back. So it was on the Focus, you can bookmark in the top right corner, and then when you finish the section, it'll show you which questions you have bookmarked, and you can go back to any question and review it and change up to 3 answers. So I had 3 bookmarked for verbal. The nice thing is if you bookmark 5, you can look at all 5 and change the 3 you're most confident in. So you're not limited to just looking at 3.
Nice. So you would go at the end of the verbal section, you would go over all of the 3 questions, for example, that you had bookmarked.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Right. And another thing that we had here, another question, is how to decide, that's from Vishal Hank, how to decide the order in which you should take the exam.
Yeah, that's one I really struggled with. And I think at like in my first practice exam, I'm a computer science major. I was a computer science major in college, engineer by trade. I was like, quant, I got it. That'll be last. It'll be a nice layup to end. And it was by far my weakest section because I'm way out of practice with some of those materials. So because I spent so much time studying for quant, because it was my weakest section, because I was most concerned about it, I did not want to spend the entire test kind of like waiting for quant, thinking, okay, yeah, I did well in this section, but what's quant's the biggest question mark, what's going to be? So I wanted to get that out of the way first. I wanted to, if I was going to be worried about quant, thinking about quant, just have it done and then move on. For me, I consider DI more, my brain works in a way where DI is pretty similar. So I wanted to bang those out next to each other. And then I think, so that's how I decided the first 2 is quant DI. And so I knew verbal was going to be last. And I decided to put the break after DI because for me, that is such a context switch in the brain to go from DI to verbal. That is something where I don't think I would have scored as well in verbal as I did if I hadn't had that break, because I was able to go to the bathroom, take some time, kind of wash out the math from my brain and bring in the creative writer.
Nice. And that's very important, right? Because you have to take very different approaches depending on the area. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And just before we go to the next question, thank you again for everyone watching us. I know it's pretty late in some parts of the road. So thank you so much for the audience. And remember, liking the video, subscribing to the channel. So going to the next question. From Max. So you mentioned, Hank, that you took the mock tests. So did you see an improvement as you took those? So week after week, as you mentioned, you didn't take 1 per week. What would be your advice for people preparing themselves now? But did you notice that improvement as you took the mock tests?
Yeah, I did notice improvement. So I already mentioned my first two scores, which was 645 and then 655, and then it was several weeks until I took the third one, and I got 705, which to me was the benchmark I was shooting for. Getting into that is starting at like the 90th percentile, getting into that top percentile, and the 705 accomplishes that. So I felt good about that. And then that was three. I think I might be getting out of order here. I think four was 735. Five, I got 745, and then on six, I dropped down to 715. And so it was a positive trend and then a dip right at the end. But I really think, once you get into the 700s on the focus, it becomes a bit of luck of getting the right questions, a bit of focus. I think on one of them, it was pretty late. I really made sure on each practice exam to not to make it as test applicable as possible. I never, paused it and like went to the bathroom, or paused it and went and got a drink. It was, each one of those, I took exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes to take those exams. It was as if I was in a testing center. But on one of them, it was like late at night, and then that's where my score dipped back to 715. I was like, okay, that was dumb. Of course, it dipped a bit. But
My
there
fault.
really becomes, it's interesting because then it like starts trading at that point. I had everything in the mid 80s, and it was like, oh well, this test like verbal, I ended up getting 89, and the next one DI, I got an 89. So that was so it kind of just started exchanging, and I couldn't quite get it all together until testing.
And how did you decide, and going off of this mock test topic, you went over your sixth one, you got the 715 score. How did you decide, okay, so now is the time for me to take it? Or did you already have it had in mind that you would take only this 6 weeks period?
I actually booked the exam at the beginning of my studying as here's a deadline, but I booked it for 4 weeks after I started studying. And 4 weeks in, I think, I'd fallen a bit behind just because I'd gotten pretty busy. Like, I said I aimed for like 5 days a week. I'd been doing like 3 days a week for a couple weeks there. So like 2 days before my test, I was like, you know what, I should really push it. And I was really mad because there's a fee to push the exam a couple weeks. But that was the best decision because pushing it is cheaper than rescheduling a new one if I wasn't happy with my score. I actually pushed the exam from my initial date to give myself a bit more time. And then I really kind of hunkered down. And I took it right after big Thanksgiving holiday. So I was able to have a week, that final week lead up. I was cramming. I was doing many more hours a day than I had been in the lead up to the exam.
And even regarding that, we got a question also from Max asking that I imagine gaming industry is demanding your time fairly. So how did you manage the study sections? And as we had mentioned, so you would go over it at least 5 days a week for 2 hours, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that was, so 5 days a week, 2 hours. And yeah, it was hard. With working a full-time job. I think that's the time management thing, I think, is like the most personal aspect of it because every situation is so different. But for me, it was a matter of just dedicating evening time. I'm someone who, like, in the evening, I get kind of a burst of productivity and always like taking that wave before bed and doing a couple hours. Some of these practice questions I did in bed with a reading light on.
Oh, yeah. You were like, let me do just one or two more before sleeping.
Yeah.
And another question that we have here from Harsh is, do you think, Hank, that there are major topics that people should focus in GMAT Quant?
That's a good question. I think that it comes down to knowing where you're at with the test because I think it's my experience was always that it was pretty even among all of the types of questions you're going to get. You're going to get I know it's adapted, but you're going to get a set number of I can't remember the quant categories right now, but you're going to get a set number of each type of question. And so I think once you have an understanding of where you're weakest, that's what you should focus on the most. Like there were like real numbers and stuff is something I never really needed to focus on because that was something that came back to me easily. I mentioned prime factorization a couple times. It's something that I really need to focus on. But that's different for everybody. So I really recommend taking a couple tests to, get those score reports, use an error log when you're studying, know which questions you're missing, and then go and focus on those topics. Because luckily it's very easy, especially like if you're looking on GMAT Club, if you miss a question, someone on GMAT Club is going to be able to tell you what section or what topic that question is from. And so it's really easy to quickly kind of figure out where you need help.
And combining some questions we're getting here, Hank. So one, could you notice the adaptive nature of the test while you were taking it? So this is one. And also regarding this trait of the test, do you think that going better or worse in one section influenced the questions you would have on the next session, or not really?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure about the section adaptivity. Like I've heard from some people that like, oh, this one might be section adaptive. I guess a GMAT official maybe hinted at that recently. And if it is, I would hope then, you'd be less penalized for wrong answers in a harder section because you did so well in a section before. Be adaptive within a section is something I tried not to notice it because like in quant, there'd be a really hard question I spent a lot of time on, and the next one would feel really easy. And it like my brain immediately jumps like, oh man, that means I must have missed the last question if I'm getting an easy question now, which is not productive to do in the middle of an exam. And sometimes I think that how the section is adaptive works really strangely, where sometimes it's like, oh, well, just the way the algorithm's working, you have to get an easy question in this category at some point. So it just happens to come after a hard question you get right. So I definitely don't recommend trying to analyze the adaptivity during the test. That being said, I did notice it. I think it's something that in larger trends, especially if you're looking at mock exam score reports, you can start to see, okay, I'm getting this many medium questions, this many hard questions in a section. So I should be more focused on that.
So sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I would just comment. So at the end of the day, the message would be, don't overthink about how hard the question you're getting is, right?
Yeah, especially during the exam, but it is relevant to look after the exam at like, oh, this one I had mostly easy questions, so I should focus on kind of sharpening those skills. Like this one I did so well in this section, I got more hard questions, so like I should focus on getting hard ones here.
Perfect. No, got it. And we did get some other questions here that we went over already in terms of preparation. If you all want to watch the video later as well, it's going to be on YouTube. So not going over it again just for the sake of time. And before we transition, one last question about the GMAT, Hank. We can come back to that if there is some extra time in the end. But from Kadamveer, also for Quant, were you getting a lot of word problems and lots more of statistics or any other content call out? So we also had a question about geometry, whether we got questions. So all we know, if you remember, were any areas that you think you got more questions about this geometry thing? How was it?
The one thing I will call out is I never saw geometry on any of the practice exams or on the real exam. Please don't take my word for it if you go and get 3 geometry questions, but for me, I never saw one. I know it could theoretically pop up, but I just never saw one. For the difference between the wordy problems and statistics, I remember being surprised on the test at the lack of wordy problems in quant. Most of mine were pretty problem focused. I don't know if that's due to the adaptivity of how I was doing in the section or what, but I think there were a couple early, and then it was mostly just kind of formula problems after that.
Perfect.
But I do know in a lot of my practice exams, there were a lot of wordy questions. So I think it's best to be prepared for anything, just maybe not geometry.
It's that old and gold, right? Be prepared for the harder because you're going to be able to go over the easier one.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for all the tips and tricks on the GMAT, Hank. So going off of that, you got this amazing score of your 775. I won't even ask you the question that I normally ask people. Hey, why did you think you didn't have to take it another time? Or I won't ask you this question because it's clear you didn't have to take it another time. And then, okay, you had the GMAT score. How did you start working on your school research to decide which schools you were going to pick?
Yeah, that's a great question. That started before the GMAT. For me, it was really I approached this as like just as I think everyone should have, like the potential of like what an MBA could lead you to. And the first step was a GMAT as kind of a barometer of where I kind of fall in looking at schools. And I think that's how people should look at it, is like, obviously, I'm very happy with my score, and I think it's hopefully opening a lot of doors and a lot of opportunities. But it is not the entire end all be all of applications. And it's still a big process to consider. It's one data point. So when I was looking, once I got the score, I kind of realized, okay, this opens up, these kind of programs for me. And when looking at programs, I wanted to consider, the industry I come from. Is there a connection to entertainment? Is there a connection to technology? How would I fit in? If there's not a direct connection to those, do I bring value to this program? I think that comes through attending information sessions, reading material online, connecting with students. If you don't have connections to the school, I feel very lucky. A lot of schools I had no connections to, but through virtual coffee chats, I've been able to have some great conversations and really get a sense of what the school culture is like and whether I could bring something to it. So from there, I kind of cast a wide net of, I wanted to apply to programs that like, I think it'd be a good fit for this one because it's a tech specific MBA. I think it'd be a good fit for this one because of the connection to entertainment. I think for this one because it's not focused on either of those, but they place a lot of people in other similar interesting fields. So casting a wide net and applying to programs where I really feel a personal fit at each one. And that also adds something different. It's not a tiered list of like, here's my reach school, my target school, my safety schools. For me, it's more each one provides something different for me.
And it's so interesting that you are saying that, because it talks to how important it is to be very specific, right, about each school on the essays you're writing, on the interviews. So you cast this wide net, from what I'm hearing, basically based on one, the tech background, how tech savvy they were, to the culture of the school, and three, this trade-off, not trade-off, but this one, what could you bring there, and two, what they would give you back.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And once you had that set, Hank, how did you go about crafting your essays and preparing the material? You got the GMAT. When you got the GMAT, you selected the school. So what was your next step?
Next step was applying, and it was kind of scary because I was so focused on. I really sectioned it out of like, all right, just focus on the GMAT. Don't even worry about applications until I get a GMAT, because that might change how I view the applications, where I'm applying, etc. And then the day after I got took the GMAT, had the score, I was like, okay, now I got to stare down the barrel of these applications. And also for me, intake in this fall makes the most sense for my personal life, professional life, everything by far. So I knew I took the test in late November, and I knew I wanted to apply round 2, which is early January. So an admissions consultant was kind of out of the question anyways, just because that's such a condensed timeline. But it was I was trying to figure out, like, do I need admissions consultant, anything? I'll go ahead and pitch for free, no ad or anything. I ended up getting Applicant Lab, which was incredibly helpful. If people are familiar, if you are a self-motivated person, I think there are a lot of great resources. Just reading any MBA application can be so daunting, and that had a lot of material for me that just broke down what all these essays meant so well, and were able to help give me some structure, and I was able to take that and finish the application. So that's how I approached it. I gave myself a week to get the list of schools, and then I created a Google sheet and pretty much like wrote out every essay prompt I was going to have to write, and started kind of formulating at large what my essays would be about, kind of crafting my story. And then I took the school with what I considered to be the hardest essay application first, and wrote those. And then that really helped the rest kind of flow easily from there.
And on these, like 1 month and 3 weeks left after selecting the schools, you were doing all of that, not only crafting, writing your essays, as also participating, joining coffee chats, school events,
Yep.
doing all of these networking work, and also gathering data to your essays,
Yep.
right? Nice.
Yes. And I
It,
would not recommend doing it on that condensed of a timeline.
uh-huh.
That it wore me down a bit. So if you are able to have more time to study for the GMAT to apply to these schools, I would recommend merging it all together a bit, not siloing off just GMAT and then just schools. But if you're able to study for the GMAT and join a coffee chat, I think that's great.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that among the schools you applied for, Hank, so you used kind of the same structure? Do you think there was among schools something you could take advantage of? Let's say you wrote your essay for school one. How would that be helpful for school two?
Um, I think it's helpful in that I don't think it's helpful in that I was able to copy and paste essays,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't recommend that. I mean, every school has a specific prompt for a reason,
Mm-hmm.
and especially on a why the school, that's a very different answer for each school. But I think it was what made it easier was the more essays I had written, the more I began to kind of understand my own reasoning for pursuing an MBA and my own uh, thoughts on where my career had led, where my life had led. And so it became an iterative process in that, by the time I was applying to the last school, I just had like a bank of references to look at and be like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, they're asking this. And yeah, this that I said earlier that is a reason, like something I'm really passionate about that applies here. So it was never like a drag copy paste, but it does give you just a deeper and deeper vault of your own memories and thoughts on yourself. I think that helps with self reflection the longer the process you go.
Some extra clarity on what
Yes.
you're saying and your thoughts. And going off to the next question, I promise everyone this is the last time I'm gonna ask you to hit like and subscribe to our channel. It helps a lot. It will make Hank happy. He didn't say anything about that, but I'm assuming.
Yes, it will.
And because if I said it would make me happy, people would just not care, So that's why I'm putting you on the line. And so, Hank, you wrote the essays, you submitted the applications, then you got the interview invites.
Hmm.
So, did you start preparing for the interviews when you got the invites, or you were doing some interview prep already ahead of that time?
I did a little bit of interview prep, but it was mostly
Mm-hmm.
once I got interviews that I started, focusing on preparing. And I feel like I'm a all right interviewer. I hope you find I'm an all right interviewer after today. But I didn't spend
Mm-hmm.
as much time doing interview prep as I did in other parts of the process, just because I I was worried that for me personally, if I do too much prep, I'll start to stick to a script in my head, and I never
Mm-hmm.
wanted to feel scripted in an interview. I think any interview should be pretty open back and forth, and so I, kind of wanted the challenge of having to speak on my feet. So I think writing the essays was honestly the best interview prep. That was kind of the self reflection period and getting to know my true answers for a lot of the essay questions that are kind of parallel to interview questions. And so I think my interview prep is mostly kind of reviewing what I've already said and what I've reflected on, and just like having that on top of my mind so that I can answer on top of my feet.
Mm-hmm. And that's so important, right? This factor of not sounding robotic.
Hmm.
Because the interview, I believe that many times people forget it's supposed to be something through which the outcome will know you as a person, right? So
Hmm.
when you just have the questions memorized there, the answers, you just don't let your personality shine. So I think it's really important, as you said, to just let it flow.
Yeah.
And now going forward, Hank, so I heard you are waiting for the answers, right, from these schools you applied for.
Yes.
And your expectation is that they come in March, most of them, or no, in February still?
I think March I mean, every school has a different decision date in round 2, but I think most are around March. I have a spreadsheet somewhere where I have them all listed, the date for each one. But yeah, it's not mostly until next month.
Also known as anxiety day, right? When you're gonna be like with the phone in your hand, just waiting for
exactly.
it. I do remember, like, as time went by, that I remember a feeling like of just telling myself, "Oh my God, they haven't called up to this time. They're not coming anymore. You know, I'm out. I'm out." I would tell my wife that, and she would say, "Could you shut up, please? Just wait." So yeah, it's hard, right? This anxiety.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. It's not fun.
And so all we know, Hank, it will have been around 6 months, right? Between prep, between applying and getting the answer for you to be part of class of 2026, right?
Yeah.
And just in these last 4 minutes that we have, any final advice you would like to give to people watching us, to people who are preparing for the GMAT or applying right now? Anything we didn't really touch on?
I don't think so. I mean, if anything, for the GMAT, I would just reiterate, I think, the importance of practice exams, especially the new focus exam ones. I wish, honestly, I had realized they were designed to be taken twice each. I didn't realize that 12 practice exams is just an insane bang for your buck if you're just paying for those 6 official exams they have. So that's my number one tip for prepping for the GMAT. For applying to schools, I don't know that I'm qualified since I'm still waiting. But I mean, I really like my process, which, like I said, was just really figuring out schools, not based on prestige or anything, but just like the your personal fit to each school, and then that helps make the entire application more authentic, because it is. So that's my number one tip for applying, I guess.
That sounds amazing. And actually, I do have one last question from Karanvir that said, "Thanks, Hank. What test are you crushing next? So could you let us know?"
I don't think I am going to be taking any other tests soon. I'm happy with this test score.
The next test you're going to be crushing will be the interview ones, like not officially test, but somewhat like a test, right?
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Hank, for all the very, very helpful advice you have given to all of us here. I have learned a lot chatting with you, and it was really a pleasure. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for everyone watching us, and hope to see you soon again. And to get the good news, I hope you're going to post them on the forum like, "Hey, I got admitted to all schools that I have applied for." So just hoping for that.
Oh, thank you. It was great talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much once again. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you all in our next debrief session, hopefully. Bye.
Bye.